A pleasant day to you. My name is Judith Sanchez, and I'm your English teacher. And our topic for today is called Active and Passive Voice of the Verb. We've been introduced to a verb and its components, and now let's dive more on its classification. When to use the active and passive voice in writing. It may sound strange to hear that written sentences have voices, and even stranger to know that there are debates on which of the two, passive and active, is better option when it comes to writing. This topic gives a definition of both voices as well as examples of situations when each can be used properly. So what's the difference between the active and passive voice? Before I give you some examples of those, let me first define a voice. Voice refers to a connection between the subject and the object of a sentence, which is linked through a verb. The active voice is so called because the subject of the sentence is the doer of an action that affects the sentence object. For example, Julie baked the cake. In the above example, the subject, Julie, performed the action bake on an object, cake. The passive voice, on the other hand, is when the object is acted upon by the subject of the sentence. Example, the cake was baked by Julie. The object, cake, was the recipient of an action, bake, which was performed by the subject, Julie. One indicator that a sentence is written in the passive voice is that it comes with a be verb followed by a past participle. However, it is still possible for a sentence to be in the active voice despite having a form of the be verb in it. For instance, I am eating a pie is in the active voice despite the be verb am. Another clue to look out for is the absence of an object in the sentence, which can indicate that this is written using the passive voice, although it is possible to have an active sentence without an object. When do I use the active or the passive voice? Some people believe that sentences should be written in the active voice whenever possible. This might be because doing so can make your writing more concise. As can be seen in the example above, the passive voice usually requires more words. When improperly written, it can also sound awkward and vague, especially when the subject of the sentence is only implied and not deliberately mentioned. However, this does not necessarily mean that using the passive voice should be avoided at all cost. It actually has its own uses. For instance, many authors use it as a tool in fiction writing. In particular, mystery writers are big fans of the passive voice since it allows them to conceal secrets within their stories. The lack of emphasis on the actor has also made the passive voice the primary choice when it comes to scientific or academic writing. While there has now been a shift in terms of allowing scientists to discuss the actions they have taken in the experiments they have conducted, the science field remains partial to the passive voice in order to maintain a tone of objectivity. This is because it does not put particular focus on individual perspective and instead looks at the actions undertaken as well as the results. In writing, Always consider whether you should use the passive or active voice. It will depend on what you, the writer, want to convey. If you want to draw attention to the doer, use the passive voice. If your intent is to put the focus on the action, then you should go for the active voice. Reasons to use active voice. Most writers prefer to use active voice because it is more direct. Now, let me further discuss active voice. Most English sentences with an action verb, the subject performs the action denoted by the verb. These examples show that the subject is doing the verb's action. Example number one. The man must have eaten 5 hamburgers. The man, subject, is doing the eating, which is the verb. Another example. Marilyn mailed the letter. The sentence is active because Marilyn, the subject, is doing the mailing, which is the verb. Now let me proceed to the third example. Colorful parrots live in the rainforest. Parrots, the subject, are doing the living, which is the verb. Remember, if the subject does or acts upon the verb in such sentences, the sentences are in the active voice. This time, let me discuss passive voice. One can change the normal word order of many active sentences, those with a direct object, so that the subject is no longer active, but is instead being acted upon by the verb or passive. Note in these examples how the subject-verb relationship has changed. Example number one is 5 hamburgers must have been eaten by the man. Remember, hamburgers is our hamburgers word is a subject, are being eaten, which is the verb. The letter was mailed by Marilyn. Example number two. The letter, which is the subject, was mailed is the verb. Remember, if the subject is being acted upon or is passive, such sentences are in the passive voice. Note, colorful parrots live in the rainforest cannot be changed to passive voice because the sentence does not have a direct object. Remember that. To change a sentence from active to passive voice, do the following. Number one, move the active sentence's direct object into the sentence's subject slot. Here's the example. Marilyn mailed the letter, which is the direct object. The letter is the subject. Number two, place the active sentence's subject into a phrase beginning with the preposition by. Here's the example. Marilyn, the subject, mailed the letter. The letter by Marilyn, which is the prepositional phrase. Add a form of auxiliary verb be to the main verb and change the main verb's form. Marilyn mailed verb the letter and the letter was mailed, which is the auxiliary verb by Marilyn. Passive voice sentences necessarily add words and change the normal doer, action, receiver of action direction. They may make the reader work harder to understand the intended meaning. As the examples here illustrate, a sentence in active voice flows more smoothly and is easier to understand than the same sentence in passive voice. Here it is. Active voice. At each concert, the soprano, doer of the action, sang action at least one tune, receiver of the action, from a well-known opera. Now let's see passive voice. At each concert, at least one tune, receiver of action, from a well-known opera was sung, action, by the soprano, doer of the action. And let me give you one more example shown on your screen. How to change a passive voice sentence into an active voice sentence. Simply reverse the steps shown on your screen earlier. Number 1. Move the passive sentence's subject into the active sentence's direct object slot. Here's the example. Passive voice. The letter subject was mailed by Marilyn. And for the active voice will be mailed the letter, direct object. Number 2, remove the auxiliary verb be from the main verb and change the main verb's form if needed. The letter was mailed, be auxiliary. Remove this and mailed the letter. Number 3, place the passive sentence's object of the preposition by into the subject slot. By Marilyn, object of the preposition by, and then it will become Marilyn mailed. Most writers prefer to use the active voice whenever possible. The passive voice may be a better choice, however, when the doer of the action is a known and wanted or a needed in this sentence. Examples: the ballots have been counted. Sometimes our efforts are not fully appreciated. This time, I want you to transform the following active voice to passive voice by yourself. I'll give you at least 5 minutes to answer, and I'll show you the following questions on your screen. I hope you got everything correct, and I also hope you've understood our lesson, active and passive voice of the verb. Once again, I am Jideric A. Sanchez, your English teacher. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.